You have spent hundreds of hours explaining yourself. You have crafted the perfect texts, delivered the most logical arguments, and exhausted your soul, trying to make them see what they did to you. And every single time, they twisted your words and used your anger against you. You believe that if you just fight back hard enough, you will win. That is exactly what they want you to think. Society teaches you to communicate. Manipulators rely on you communicating so they can siphon your energy. If you are tired of losing to people who play dirty, your suffering ends right now. Do not click away. Today, we are going to unlock Machiavelli's most ruthless psychological weapon, the absolute, total erasure of your enemies. Most people misunderstand that line because most people still think power is loud. It is not. Machiavelli was exposing a brutal law of human behavior. Half measures create endless retaliation. Partial withdrawal still leaves a door open. Partial detachment still leaves blood in the water. You keep arguing, they keep feeding. You keep clarifying, they keep reframing. You keep defending, they keep discovering exactly where your nervous system is weakest. This is the lie you were programmed to believe, that good people win by being transparent, emotionally available, and endlessly reasonable. But the system rewards predictability, and manipulators exploit predictability better than anyone. They do not fear your logic. They study your conscience. They do not respect your sincerity. They weaponize your need to be understood. What you call communication, they experience as access. What you call closure, they experience as supply. What you call fighting back, they experience as control. So here is the forbidden question you were never taught to ask. What if fighting back is exactly what your enemies want, and your absolute indifference is the only thing that will actually destroy their leverage? What if your reaction is the rope they use to pull you back into the cage? What if the final move is not a better argument, but a total refusal to remain emotionally available? To people who survive by extracting your attention, in this video, you are going to understand the ghost protocol, not as immature ghosting, not as passive-aggressive silence, as Machiavellian strategy, as psychological warfare through absence, as manipulation defense so precise that the person who once lived off your reaction begins starving on their own pattern. You will learn why weaponized silence creates more pressure than confrontation, why what people call narcissist collapse often begins the moment access disappears, and why the strongest move is not to dominate the battlefield, but to make the battlefield disappear. By the end, you will stop behaving like a wounded attorney, pleading your case to a corrupt judge. You will become unreadable, untouchable, economical. You will know the exact moment to withdraw, the exact mistake 99% of people make when they try no contact, and the internal discipline required to erase toxic people from the only territory that matters: your attention, your schedule, your nervous system, your future. If these ideas resonate with you, hit that subscribe button for more top-tier content. Also, drop a "erase them" in the comments so I know you're ready. Let's dive in. Here is the first law of the Ghost Protocol. Your attention is a strategic resource, not a charitable donation. You were taught that communication solves conflict, but Machiavelli knew that access creates leverage. The more access a manipulator has to your time, your explanations, your emotional weather, the more material they have to shape the game. Your greatest weakness in this game is actually your dormant weapon. The very sensitivity that made you easy to provoke can become the precision that lets you notice when someone is fishing for reaction. The same mind that once over-explained can learn to underreact. The same heart that once rushed to resolve tension can learn to let tension expose who was exploiting it. Anger is not power. Anger is a confession that they still control your nervous system. Let that land. Every time your pulse spikes because of a text, a stare, a vague post, a petty jab in a meeting, you are receiving evidence. Not evidence that they are powerful. Evidence that they still have a key to your interior. And if they have a key, they have access. And if they have access, they have leverage. This is why the ghost protocol begins long before silence becomes visible. It begins with a cold calculation. Who profits when you are dysregulated? The answer is almost never you. The toxic boss profits because you become easier to frame as emotional. The manipulative partner profits because you begin arguing on terrain they control. The narcissistic parent profits because your guilt keeps you returning for trial in a court they designed. The fake friend profits because your outrage keeps their status alive inside your mind. This is psychological warfare at its simplest. Whoever controls focus controls the rhythm of the relationship. The moment you try to prove you are right, you have already submitted to their judgment. That is why your paragraphs fail. That is why your perfect evidence goes nowhere. That is why your calm explanation somehow turns into another night of mental exhaustion. You are still acting as if the truth is the issue. It is not. Access is the issue. Focus is the issue. Supply is the issue. A manipulator can lose the argument and still win the game if they leave with your attention. Stop for a moment and calculate the energy you waste on people who are not confused, only strategic. How many hours have you donated to imaginary courtroom speeches in the shower, while driving, in bed, in the middle of work? How much life have you poured into rehearsing what you should have said? How much dignity have you spent trying to convince someone to behave like a human being when their advantage depends on not doing that? This is why weaponized silence feels so foreign at first. It reverses the training. It tells you that not responding is not weakness, not clarifying is not surrender, not chasing is not fear. Your disengagement is your most powerful engagement. You are not losing the fight. You are removing the fuel. And before you say, "But if I go silent, won't they think they won?" ask a better question. Won what? Your absence, your non-compliance, your refusal to bleed on command? People who need your reaction do not win when you disappear. They panic when you become unpredictable. But simply ignoring them will backfire completely unless you understand the anatomy of the parasite. A manipulator does not care if you love them or hate them. They only care that you are focused on them. That sentence explains more human behavior than most people want to admit. The person who keeps baiting you does not need intimacy. They need occupancy. They need to live inside your attention. They need proof that they can still move your emotions from a distance. That is why so many dark psychology tricks look childish on the surface and devastating underneath. Baiting, contradicting, selective memory, playing dumb, false urgency, last-minute crises, public disrespect followed by private innocence. They are not random. They are extraction methods. You cannot out-argue a person who has no intention of understanding you. That is the parasite logic. They do not enter the conversation to discover reality. They enter to test access. If you respond, access confirmed. If you explain, access deepened. If you rage, jackpot. If you send the 10-paragraph message, you have done their work for them. You have mapped your wounds, revealed your values, and proven that a small stimulus can still purchase a large piece of your mind. This is why manipulation defense begins with a darker understanding of human nature than you were allowed to have. You thought some people fight unfairly because they are emotional. No. Some people fight unfairly because unfairness works. They understand power dynamics better than the people they exploit. They know guilt is easier to trigger than respect is to earn. They know conscientious people can be trapped by their own standards. They know the kind person will stay in the ring longer because the kind person believes the conflict must be resolved. They know your decency can be used as a leash. Machiavelli saw this clearly. In The Prince, Power is never just force. It is perception, timing, access, fear, dependency, expectation. The naive person asks, how do I make them understand? The strategist asks, what reward are they receiving from this pattern, and how do I remove it? That is the shift from wounded intellect to Machiavellian strategy. Not cruelty, clarity. And this is where people begin obsessing over narcissist collapse. They want the manipulator to finally break, finally feel the loss, finally understand what they destroyed. But listen carefully. The moment you become fixated on narcissist collapse, you are still revolving around them. You are still waiting for their nervous system to validate your decision. That is not freedom. That is dependency wearing armor. What people call narcissist collapse is often much less dramatic and much more revealing. It is the instability that appears when a person loses easy access to supply. They send strange messages. They escalate. They smear. They fake emergencies. They suddenly remember your value. They circle back with nostalgia, rage, or pity. Why? Because the mirror disappeared. The pressure is not coming from you attacking them. The pressure is coming from them not being able to extract themselves from you anymore. That is the power of the ghost protocol. You do not need to humiliate them. You do not need to expose them. You do not need to become a villain to people who already live there. You simply refuse to remain usable. Here is the tactical advantage your emotionally reactive competitors will never have. When you understand the reward structure, you stop personalizing the provocation. You stop asking, why are they like this? And start asking, why would they stop if I keep feeding it? That question changes everything. It transforms pain into strategy. It turns dark psychology tricks into visible machinery. It upgrades your pain into manipulation defense. But I am about to reveal the exact moment their mind begins to fracture under your silence. And if you miss this phase, you will walk straight back into the trap. The most dangerous moment is not when you are trapped in the cycle. The most dangerous moment is when you finally leave it. Because the instant your reaction disappears, the system that fed on it does not quietly accept defeat. It spikes. In behavioral terms, this is the extinction burst. The behavior gets louder before it dies. The messages become sweeter or crueler. The provocations become more theatrical. The coincidence sightings multiply. The mutual friends suddenly appear. The toxic boss becomes weirdly charming in public and vicious in private. The manipulative partner sends one message that sounds like closure and another that sounds like war. The person you were trying to escape becomes more visible precisely because access is shrinking. If you fail to anticipate this next phase, they will drag you right back into the mud. This is where 99% of people break no contact. Not because they are weak, but because they misread escalation as meaning. They think maybe they finally care, or maybe I should answer just once to be mature, or maybe one final message will end this cleanly. No. For people who feed on access, your final message is not closure, it is oxygen. Weaponized silence is not the absence of words, it is the presence of discipline. You need rules before the pressure comes, not during. During pressure, your body will try to negotiate with the old pain. During pressure, your loneliness will start translating breadcrumbs into hope. During pressure, your mind will romanticize the person you were trying to survive. That is why the ghost protocol is a structure, not a mood. Rule 1. Never respond at their tempo. Urgency is one of the oldest dark psychology tricks in existence. The faster they make you move, the less strategically you think. If a response is required for legal, workplace, family, or logistical reasons, you delay until your body is neutral. Not numb, neutral. Rule 2. If a response is necessary, answer the fact, never the hook. Ignore the insult. Ignore the accusation. Ignore the emotional bait. Respond only to the logistical reality, and do it in the smallest number of words possible. Short answers are not rude. They are boundary architecture. Rule 3. Never jade. Do not justify, argue, defend, or explain. That acronym alone will save years of your life. Why? Because explanation is exposure. You are handing a loaded gun to a manipulator every time you explain your feelings. They do not hear your sincerity as sincerity. They hear it as a map. Rule 4. Document instead of react. In workplace conflict, save the email. In family conflict, keep the timeline. In legal or co-parenting situations, route everything through appropriate channels. The ghost protocol is not reckless disappearance. It is controlled access. It is clean, strategic, and defensible. Rule 5. Expect the extinction burst to impersonate love. This is where people get pulled back in. The apology arrives without accountability. The compliment arrives without change. The crisis arrives without responsibility. The tears arrive without repair. You read emotion and call it transformation. But transformation is not intensity. Transformation is pattern interruption over time. What if your silence is the loudest scream they have ever heard? It is, because silence forces them into the one room they avoid most, the room where they are no longer controlling the script. As long as you answer, they can manage the scene. When you stop, they are left with themselves, with uncertainty, with the collapse of immediate access. This is why people obsess over narcissist collapse. They can feel that something destabilizes when supply disappears. But your mission is not to sit outside the window and watch. Your mission is to keep walking. Machiavelli would have understood this perfectly. The prince does not waste energy trying to morally convert a hostile actor. He removes their options, their leverage, their access to him. That is real psychological warfare. Not screaming louder, not proving purity, not crafting the perfect comeback, refusing to remain available to someone whose entire strategy depends on your response. Watch carefully, because now we rewrite the rules of access. The person who sets the rules of access sets the rules of emotional reality. Read that again. Most of your suffering did not come from one insult, one betrayal, one lie. It came from unrestricted access. People reached you whenever they wanted, in whatever tone they wanted, and your conditioning told you that maturity meant availability. But availability without standards is not kindness. It is an invitation to be managed. The ghost protocol changes this by doing something radical. It makes access expensive. Not through games, through standards. You do not answer immediately anymore. You do not reward disrespect with clarification anymore. You do not provide emotional customer service to people who treat you like a utility anymore. You do not pick up every call. You do not return every energy. You do not let every problem become your emergency. You do not teach people that pressing harder earns more of you. This is where Machiavellian strategy becomes visible in daily life. At work, you stop defending your character and start documenting your output. When a toxic boss baits you in front of others, you answer the task, not the insult. You become difficult to frame because you are no longer giving emotional footage. In relationships, you stop mistaking accessibility for intimacy. When a manipulative partner starts a circular argument, you exit the maze instead of trying to solve it. In family dynamics, you stop auditioning for the role of good one and start acting like a sovereign adult. You do not owe unlimited access to people simply because they are familiar. Here is what access control looks like in practice. You move high-conflict communication to writing when possible. You create delays. You keep your responses factual. You stop sending vulnerable updates to people who have already proven they will weaponize them. You remove them from the center of your attention economy. You stop checking their pages, their stories, their status, their reactions, their possible reactions, their friends' reactions, your imagined future reactions. If your thumb still searches for them, the protocol is not complete. You think you have cut them off, but you are still making one fatal psychological error. You are still giving them premium space in your head. This is the subtle trap. External distance without internal detachment is just silent obsession. You can block the number and still replay the arguments. You can stop replying and still keep writing speeches in your mind. You can go no contact and still secretly hope for narcissist collapse to prove you mattered. But if they still occupy your interior, they still have access, invisible access, the most expensive kind. So the rules of access must apply to thought, not just communication. When the mental loop begins, you do not wrestle it dramatically. You cut the circuit, you redirect the body, move, work, read, lift, build. Write for yourself, not to send. Replace rumination with production. Replace fantasy confrontation with self-command. The system needs you to believe closure comes from them. Your freedom begins when you see the lie. This is not coldness for the sake of coldness. This is manipulation defense at the level of identity. You are training yourself to become expensive, difficult to provoke, hard to read, harder to use. You are withdrawing that validation. You are implementing this silence. You are observing without engagement. And no, this does not make you cruel. It makes you accurate. The guilt you feel is often just old conditioning protesting the end of your exploitation. You were taught that self-prioritization is selfish precisely because self-prioritization makes you harder to control. You were taught that immediate softness is virtue because immediate softness kept doors open for people who never deserved a key. The true power of Machiavelli is not in what you do. It is in what you refuse to let others do to you. And the ghost protocol becomes complete only when that refusal is no longer performative, but natural. There is a final stage most people never reach. They stop talking to the manipulator, but they do not stop identifying as the wounded person who must someday be vindicated. That identity has to die. If your reactive self remains alive, anyone with enough skill, enough history, or enough cruelty will eventually resurrect it. One phrase, one memory, one accusation, one late-night message, one public smear, and suddenly you are back in the courtroom, defending your humanity to someone who benefits from denying it. That is why this final stage matters more than all the others. The ghost protocol is not complete when they stop contacting you. It is complete when they stop being able to internally summon you. This is where weaponized silence becomes more than a tactic. It becomes a state. You no longer speak from the need to be understood by hostile people. You no longer reveal your whole interior to prove you are sincere. You no longer chase fairness from those who survive through asymmetry. You become strategically opaque, not fake. Opaque. Private where you used to be overexposed, deliberate where you used to be impulsive, still where you used to be provoked. Silence is not retreat. Silence is annihilation of the old access pattern. That is why the ghost state creates what so many people describe as narcissist collapse. Not because you are attacking, not because you are plotting, not because you are using dark psychology tricks to break someone. It happens because a manipulative system begins failing when the expected reaction disappears. The machine coughs, the script glitches, the person who relied on your accessibility starts crashing into empty space. They may call that cruelty, they may call that abandonment, they may call that cold. But what they are actually experiencing is consequence, and there is a difference between consequence and revenge. Revenge still kneels before the person it hates. Consequence walks away. That is your path. Not becoming a worse manipulator, becoming untouchable to manipulation. That is the highest form of psychological dominance available to a civilized mind. You do not need to master dark psychology tricks to abuse others. You need to understand dark psychology tricks so thoroughly that they stop working on you. You do not need to terrorize anyone. You need to become psychologically unavailable to those who once treated your heart like an open tab. When you master this detachment, you will notice something unsettling. People who once tested you will grow confused. Some will intensify, some will vanish, some will suddenly become respectful. Why? Because your previous pattern taught them you were reachable through guilt, urgency, or emotional smoke. Your new pattern teaches them there is no handle there anymore. This is command respect without begging for it. This is emotional intelligence without self-betrayal. This is social dominance without chaos. This is psychological warfare by refusal. This is the ghost protocol. And understand this clearly, the point is not to become empty. The point is to become sovereign, warm with the worthy, silent with the predatory, generous with the reciprocal, closed to the extractive. Your psyche is a silent fortress, and every unearned entry point must be sealed. Now, the real question is not whether they deserve another chance. The real question is whether you are finally ready to stop funding your own exhaustion. You began this as an emotionally exhausted victim trapped in reactive, looping conflict. Someone smart enough to see the game, but still too entangled to leave it. Now you see the architecture. You see why arguments failed. You see why explanations fed the cycle. You see why your enemy never feared your anger, only your absence. You see why Machiavelli still matters. Why Machiavellian strategy is less about aggression than about leverage. And why the most devastating move is often the clean removal of access. You do not need another speech. You do not need another showdown. You do not need one final, perfectly crafted paragraph. You need the death of your reactive self. Kill the version of you that still rushes to explain. Kill the version of you that still thinks fairness can be negotiated with exploiters. Kill the version of you that still confuses attention with love, urgency with importance, and conflict with connection. Let that self end here, and replace it with someone quieter, colder, clearer, someone who understands that weaponized silence is not a mood, but a discipline. Someone who understands that manipulation defense is not a one-time trick, but a way of structuring life. Someone who understands that the ghost protocol is not about disappearing from the world, but disappearing from the systems that fed on you. If this is the line you are drawing, comment. Erase them, not because you need to threaten anyone, because you are done giving your presence to people who mistook it for a resource to harvest. And if you are serious about this path, subscribe, because most places will teach you to cope. Very few will teach you to see. Very few will teach you Machiavelli without apology, dark psychology tricks without naivety, narcissist collapse without fantasy, manipulation defense without cowardice, and psychological warfare in its highest form, disciplined non-participation. This is for the people who are done being readable to predators. The people who are building internal empires, the detached, the silent strategists, those who build power by refusing to leak it. And whatever you do, do not stop now. The on-screen video matters more than you think, because this protocol fails if you miss the next layer. If you want to make sure they can never trigger you again, watch the next one immediately. Continue the training. Seal the remaining doors. See what others miss. Know what others fear. Become who others can't.